It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a nigga on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there.
Good evening, everybody. You're watching America First. My name is Nicholas J. Fuentes. We have a great show for you tonight. Very excited to be back here with you tonight on Monday. We have a lot to talk about tonight, lots to get into. Big show. Our featured story tonight, we're going to be talking all about Tucker Carlson's interview with Mike Huckabee. Have you guys seen this? Or, I should say, did you see it before it was taken down? And we'll get into that a little bit. Actually, it seems that the original interview was actually removed because Tucker Carlson made potentially a libelous allegation against the president of Israel, said that he was on Epstein Island. He, in fact, was not, or at least he claims he wasn't. So they actually wound up having to pull it. But in any case, there was a huge interview. We may get into that later in the show. I don't think it's that important. We're going to be talking all about this wide-ranging interview between the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, and Tucker Carlson. Some very interesting stuff. And obviously, it was a bombshell. The biggest aspect of it that I want to get into tonight is about this claim regarding Greater Israel. And I got to give credit where it's due. You know I'm not Tucker's biggest fan, and we have kind of a feud going lately. But I will say, the biggest single aspect of this interview is that it exposed, I think explicitly, maybe for the first time, the Greater Israel Project. And to his credit, Tucker flipped this whole narrative about Israel's right to exist on its head. And it's something actually that we've discussed on this show at great length. Whenever you talk about Israel, whenever you talk about Palestine, the war with Iran, any of this stuff, and specifically whenever anybody criticizes Israel, you get hit with this question. People say, well, does Israel have a right to exist? And then that's typically followed by, well, if Israel has a right to exist, does it have the right to defend itself? And that's typically followed by, therefore, Israel can do whatever it wants. They can genocide people, kill civilians, preemptive strikes, you name it. And we've talked about that actually specifically on the show last week. What was amazing in this interview is that Tucker actually got to the center of that question, Israel's right to exist. And where does that actually come from? And the answer was very interesting. Mike Huckabee had a two-part answer. He said, in the first place, there's international law, which makes sense. Modern countries and borders and states are established by international agreements, peace agreements after wars, diplomatic conventions. But the big one, and this is what makes Israel unique, Israel's right to exist, they claim, derives from the Bible. There is a God-given right for Israel, according to the Jews, according to the modern-day Zionists. What's interesting, though, about that claim and about that God-given legal right to exist is that it isn't just for the modern territory that Israel controls. It's actually for like the entire Middle East. It's for half of Egypt. It's for the Sinai. It's for some of Saudi Arabia, some of Iraq, all of Jordan, I think all of Lebanon or most of it, right up through into central Syria. And so what's very interesting in the interview is Tucker said, okay, well, if Israel has this right to exist, and where does that right come from? If it comes from the Bible, then who is to say that Israel doesn't have a claim to the whole territory, to the whole Middle East? Mike Huckabee's answer was even more interesting. He said, well, they do have a right to it. As a matter of fact, Israel has a right to everything west of the Jordan River, so that's modern-day Israel and the occupied territories of Palestine. But also, Huckabee seemed to be saying they also have a right to the rest. And the rest is, like I said, all those countries. That's like most of the modern Middle East or something like half of it. And it seemed that very quickly he recognized the problem, he recognized the mistake he made, and he tried to walk it back and said, well, I don't think they're really going to do that, and I don't think they're going to go for that. That's not really in the cards. But it doesn't change the fact that that is actually what a lot of Israelis believe. That's what the founders of the state of Israel believe. There's actually a whole ideology named after this. It's called revisionist Zionism. And they believe that Israel is everything west and east of the Jordan River, everything from the Nile to the Euphrates. And if that's the basis of Israel's statehood, this biblical claim, well, then this is an intellectual problem that Zionists have to deal with when they're defending Israel. Who is to say that they don't have a claim and that they might not lay claim to it or pursue that claim in the future if it comes from the same place as this right to exist? So that was truly spectacular, and we'll talk about it tonight. This is drawn condemnation from almost all the countries in the Middle East: Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, the Arab League, Organization of the Islamic Conference. This has provoked now an international incident. So credit where it's due. I think Tucker did a phenomenal job, fantastic job. It wasn't, I don't think, as good as it could have been. I'm going to nitpick a little bit, but I do think that by itself is a massive victory and a very important development. It's a very important refinement in the conversation about Israel, because it's a question that needs to be answered. If Israel has this right to exist, what actually does that entail? What are they entitled to in terms of security guarantees, weapons, land, support, all of it? That's a question that needs to be answered by the pro-Israel camp. Now, here's the second thing we have to get into, and I think this was a serious mistake. I don't think this is nitpicking. And this is also having to do with the interview. During the interview, and this didn't provoke as much of a response, but I think it raises an eyebrow, because this is a narrative I see everywhere now, and I see it being promoted by some of the most prominent critics of Israel. During the same interview, Tucker raised the question of, and this is again related to the claim of Israel's right to exist, Tucker questioned whether the modern day people of Israel, those who claim to be the Jews, the same Jews with continuity going back to the Old Testament, and therefore that claim that was given to Abraham for all this land, Tucker questioned whether the modern day Jews are those same Jews. Are they the same people? Is the modern day state of Israel comprised of the same people with the same ancestry, the same patronage, or I should say, I don't know what the word would be for that, but you understand, they descend from those people. And then therefore, is this the same Israel? Is this actually the same kingdom they're seeking to establish from the Old Testament? And he said about this, and specifically regarding Bibi Netanyahu, he said that these people that have moved to Israel from Central and Eastern Europe, these so-called Ashkenazi Jews, he said they are from Poland. He said they're not from the Middle East. They're not Middle Easterners. And so the implication is maybe they're not the real Jews. Maybe they're not the real people of the book. Maybe they don't have actually a claim to the land. And this is a question which I see being raised not just by Tucker, but also by Candace Owens and Ron Unz and by Alexander Dugin and many others in the Israel critical space. This is something you see and hear all the time. They say that Israel is not made up of real Jews. And by real Jews, again, they mean people that come from the Middle East. They mean the people of Abraham and Moses, the people that fled Egypt, the people that established the kingdom of Israel, that were expelled by the Roman Empire. There is this persistent narrative that those people are lost, and the people in Israel now are interlopers. And how exactly they came to identify as Jews, that's a matter of contention. And some say they are Khazarians. Khazarians are this Turkic steppe people from Central Asia that came to identify as Jewish during the Middle Ages. And they settled in Central and Eastern Europe. And this is from where the Ashkenazi Jews came. This is one of the ideas. Other people say maybe it has nothing to do with the Khazarians, but Ashkenazi Jews just aren't Jewish at all. And it's some kind of elaborate LARP. It's some kind of case of mistaken identity. And not only is this false, this is totally false. This is just scientifically disproven. There has been now a massive amount of literature created on this. There's been a lot of genetic testing and a lot of science, and there's a lot of data out there which show that Ashkenazi Jewish people have Levantine DNA. They do have the same DNA as people from the Middle East 2,500 years ago. So this has been debunked. This is not any theory which is supported by evidence. There's no intellectual rigor there. This is something that was invented about 100 years ago. And now that we have modern genetic testing, which is widespread, this has been thoroughly debunked. And not only is this false, but I think it's a very pernicious and harmful narrative. And I also question if there's a political motivation there. Because if the people in Israel are not the Jews, well, then what does that make them actually? I guess then they're just white people. And I really don't like the implication there, because you hear this in a lot of left-wing circles. In a lot of left-wing, anti-Zionist, anti-racist circles, guys like Max Blumenthal and some of the other usual suspects, this narrative is very popular. And they say that what Israel really is a settler colonialist project by white people. If Netanyahu is just some Polish person, well, then he's just some white person from Europe who doesn't belong there. Then he's just another colonizer. He's just another white colonizer that is oppressing indigenous brown people. And you hear this, again, this is very common among the left, anti-racist, anti-Zionist circles, because this is part of their broader narrative, which is anti-white and anti-colonial. So they will say that Netanyahu is just another white supremacist who's lost, just another white supremacist settler from Europe who doesn't belong in the Middle East. And not only does that then become an attack on white people, but it takes away from what Israel really is, which is Jewish supremacy. Netanyahu is a Jew. The Israelis are Jews. The Ashkenazim are Jews. The Zionist project is based on Jewish mythology. And the way in which they treat the native people is based on Jewish chauvinism, which is sourced from the Old Testament. It comes straight out of the Jewish Bible. It comes straight out of the Talmud. When the Hebrew Bible is telling them, genocide Amalek, kill the women, kill the children, kill everybody. And the Talmud says you have to spit on idolaters, kill idolaters, all that sort of stuff. And then in the modern state of Israel, they're murdering civilians, and Netanyahu says that's Amalek, Palestine is Amalek. Well, you can see there is a genetic lineage that goes back to Israel, and there is an intellectual lineage that goes back to the Jews. So I don't like this. This is not true. And this is a deception. This is a false narrative. And I don't think that's innocent. I don't think that's a mistake. That's not an oopsie. So we'll talk more about that. But that'll be our big story for tonight. I was going to talk a little bit about the tariffs. We're probably not going to get into that because we have a ton of stuff to talk about. I do want to also talk a little bit about the war in Iran, which seems to be upcoming. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this tonight because we spent all week talking about Iran. There's really not much more to add right now. We'll talk a little bit about it at the beginning of the show, and then we'll spend the bulk of the time talking about this Tucker Huckabee interview, because it's a big deal. But before we do, I want to remind you to smash the follow button on Rumble, smash the like button, leave a comment, let me know what you think about the show. Check out our merch store at Fuentes.store. And I actually have, finally, so we have the hats. We have the America First hat. We have the Groyper in Abundance hat. We have the Goyim in Abundance Groyper Intelligence Agency hat. And we also just got this in. We have our Beware of Foreign Influence flag. And it's a little big, kind of cumbersome, but I'll try to show it to you. So we also have our brand new, we've had these on the store for a long time, but I didn't have one myself. Can we fit it all in the frame? So get a load of that. Isn't that awesome? Beware of foreign influence. You know, we modified it a little bit. It's kind of funny. This flag is actually anti-Catholic, but I said, you know, we're just going to take it. We're going to appropriate it because the foreign influence is now coming from Jews and immigrants. So, you know, the message is really timeless. If you Google it, this comes from the Know Nothing Party, and they said Catholics are ruining everything. But, you know, now Catholics are fine. This is now about Jews. This is now this is about Jews and immigrants. We have George Washington says America first. So check that out. America first, or excuse me, that's at Fuentes.store. Pretty high quality and big. So it's good for a dorm room. It's good for a bedroom. Fly it outside your house. But we have those. Remember to check out our subscription website as well, americafirst.plus. If you're a super fan of the show, you can subscribe and become a Plus member for $15 a month. And if you want to join the $100 a month club, you get to be in a group chat with me. I was in the group chat all day, just hanging out, talking to people. And I think that's actually a pretty good deal. $100 a month, you get to hang out with me. And it's like an infinite super chat glitch. You can ask me as many stupid questions as you want. I'm still not nice in the group chat, though. So don't expect like you're going to get a different guy. Like if you send me a stupid super chat, I get mad. If you go in the group chat and you're annoying, I get mad. And honestly, it's crazy. It's actually crazy. Because I go into the group chat in the morning, afternoon, whatever, and I try. Like I try not to spike my cortisol. I try to talk to you people. And I log in, I go, hey, good morning, what's going on, everybody? And then it's immediately dumbest shit you've ever heard, just one after the other. Today, I go in there, I go, hey, good morning, everybody, what's up? First comment, literally first comment, airplanes. That's what's up. Airplanes. And it's stuff like that. It's almost just like, this is rage bait that AI could never recreate. It's like, it's not even, it's just like, what do you even say to that? It's so not funny. It's so not, it's just pure irritation. I don't even know how you would categorize that. It's just like verbal diarrhea. It's just pure goy slop, pure goy feed, straight from the goyim's mouth. That was literally the first, like I'm drinking my morning coffee, I'm working myself up. Hey, good morning, everybody. First dumbass, airplanes. I'm like, okay, I'm waiting for the punchline, like, holy. I tried to, then I locked in, I swallowed my rage a little bit and I was able to have a normal conversation. But like, this is the level of the discourse. So it's a little bit painful at times, but we're working on it. So that's AmericaFirst.plus. Check it out. All right. Oh, one other thing before we get into the show. Tomorrow, we're going to be starting a little bit earlier. Tomorrow is the State of the Union address. That's at 7 o'clock Central Time. Actually, the speech starts at 8. I'm going to be going live at 7. So big stream tomorrow, State of the Union. We're going to endure it together. We're going to suffer through this together. That'll be at 8 o'clock tomorrow, but I'm going to be starting my stream at 7 Central Time. So it's going to be a little bit earlier. Tune in on Rumble. Okay. With that out of the way, we're going to dive in. First thing I want to talk about is about the situation with Iran. And we've been talking about this for the past couple weeks. It's very obvious where this is headed. You see what is happening. We currently have, according to the experts, 45 to 50% of our deployable air power in the Middle East right now. Half of our, not all of our air assets, but half of all of our deployable air power is in the Middle East right now. And if you go on any of the Newswire channels, you see the buildup. It is refueling aircraft, it's cargo aircraft, strike aircraft, bombers, it's 2 aircraft carriers, 13 missile destroyers. It's a lot of hardware. And it's pretty clear what's up, which is that we are mobilizing for war. Now, as we've discussed over the past couple weeks on this show in great detail, the question remains whether we are going in, when we're going in, to accomplish what and how. Ground power or air power, or both. Is it a regime change decapitation strike, or is it a sustained operation to degrade their capabilities, or is it some kind of narrow, limited strike to get them to the table? And what is the goal? Is it to extract a deal? Is it because we are now set on toppling the regime? There's a lot of questions about this. And I'm not going to actually contribute anything more to that conversation tonight. We haven't learned anything new over the weekend. There's been some discussion. They now say that there may be a third round of talks on Thursday in Geneva in Switzerland. They say that the ambassador from Oman will be delivering a response to America's demands from Iran within the next 24 hours. So it's a very dynamic situation. It seems like there still is some negotiation occurring, or at least there's a dialogue, but not much has changed. We continue to see, again, massive deployment, massive mobilization, and all signs point toward there's going to be some kind of a military action. Again, the question is just timing, mode, and the goal. All that being said, I put this out on Twitter today. It's important to take a step back and really consider the entire situation. I like to say on the show all the time that everything is related to everything else. And I think about what this says about the Trump administration. Because at the same time that we have half of our Air Force in the Middle East, and we have 2 carrier strike groups, we have the Patriot missile batteries and the THAAD systems, and we're moving our military all over the place, pulling out of Syria, moving our troops out of Iraq. We are literally moving heaven and earth here. And the latest is that Trump is furious that our military capabilities are so limited. He wants to go in heavy and hard, and he wants to topple the government in a short amount of time with a massive use of force. And he's frustrated that it seems that we have a limited ability to do that. That however we go in, it's going to be a protracted conflict. There's going to be other additional elements that will have to come into play, like some kind of ground force. And it's going to be very complicated. But you take a step back and consider, at the same time that we have this Herculean effort to overthrow the government in Iran, think about what cannot be accomplished in the United States. We had 3,000 ICE agents and Border Patrol in Minneapolis. Think about this. How many National Guard did we ever deploy to any of the Democrat cities? I think we had 300 in Chicago at one point. We had a few hundred in Minneapolis. Couldn't even sustain that. So I said this on Twitter. At the same time that half of our armed forces is in the Middle East for yet another regime change war for Israel, we can't even deploy 5,000 National Guard and Border Patrol put together to liberate an American city. Minneapolis is controlled by Somali scammers working with the Democrat Party machine in the city, working with the shithead radical left communists that are agitating in the streets. Hollywood, the media, they have control over Minneapolis. Who runs one of the nicest states in the country with the best healthcare and education and government efficacy? Who runs that state? Well, it's Jacob Fry, who said, "Get the fuck out of our city, ICE." And it's Tim Walz. And it's a bunch of Africans that are Muslim that shouldn't even be here, and illegal immigrants and communists, like those idiots that got killed by ICE and Border Patrol. That's who runs America. That is a sampling of who runs our country. Who runs Chicago? This militant black communist, Brandon Johnson, and the gangbangers and the burglars and the carjackers and criminals. Who runs New York? Muslim socialist, the homeless that are everywhere, that are in the subway, that are leaping over the turnstiles, won't pay the fare. That's who runs. This is who runs America. This is who runs the United States. And for most of the country's population, that is who runs your government. That is who runs your economic center. Most of the population lives in these Democrat shitholes or near them in a big Democrat state controlled by a major Democrat city with a huge Democrat state government. And that's who's pulling the strings there. Liberal billionaires, city machine politics, these deadbeats that work for the Democrat Party, radical college students, Antifa, and the illegal immigrants, the foreigners. This is who runs America. This is where all the tax dollars go. Apparently, that is who controls the major cities. They have veto power over borders and immigration law. And you can't deploy 1,000 National Guard to even one of them. You can't deploy a few thousand Border Patrol and ICE to even one of them. Tried it. Sent the National Guard and ICE and Border Patrol to some of the cities, and what happened? They got resisted, they got shoved out, and ultimately they retreated and surrendered and said, you know what? You have it. That's what happened in LA with the riots. That's what happened in Chicago when people rioted outside the detention facility in Broadview. That's what happened in Minneapolis. So Trump tried to fight for regime change in our country, where maybe we would be able to walk the city streets at night safely from criminals and vagabonds, where we could have borders, not be inundated with illegal immigrants, so we could fight corruption, not have all our tax dollars stolen by African Muslims that are here on TPS. That didn't work. And Trump gave up after a year. And I say that, by the way, as a resident of a suburb outside Chicago. And I had some expectation. I didn't vote, so I didn't have very high expectations that Trump might actually use our military and security and police power to restore order in America, in Chicago, in LA, in Minneapolis, in New York. And not just the law and order and the public transit, but also on the immigration front. You know, that we would actually have a country. But year in, we don't have it. At the same time, and this is really the gut punch, at the same time that we are being told by our America First president, no, we can't restore order in Chicago, too complicated. We can't restore order in Minneapolis. The protesters are too fierce. We have half of the military in the Middle East again. Really? How insane is that? Go and look at a globe, go on Google Maps, and look at how big the oceans are. How big is the Pacific Ocean? How big is the Atlantic Ocean? And we have half of our military on the other side of the planet, locked and loaded, getting ready for this huge undertaking, so expensive, so complicated, so risky, so unnecessary, to topple another government, you know, because like 10 wasn't enough. Wasn't enough to do Iraq, Syria, Libya, Lebanon. None of this was enough. Egypt, twice. Afghanistan. Now we got to go into Iran for the benefit of Israel. What Israel wants, Israel gets. This has been their mission for 45 years. They have been pushing us to do this for the last quarter century. Think about how messed up that is and what they are willing to do. Get Minneapolis under control? Can't do it. Impossible. Too difficult. Tim Walz and Jacob Fry and Antifa? We got to draw this down. We're going to stick to deporting only the criminal illegals. This is too difficult. Oh, but the 1 million man Iranian Revolutionary Guard and military, country of 90 million people on the other side of the planet? Well, it's going to be tough, but no one ever said it would be easy. What? How can anybody claim at this point, seriously, that this administration is America first? I just don't even know how you could say that with a straight face. And I see it on the timeline all day long because I'm complaining about this. I've been talking about this on my show, on Twitter. I say, look, MAGA is dead. It's over. This was supposed to be a movement for the forgotten men and women. We got forgotten. It was supposed to be about putting America first and redirecting our attention inward towards our problems as citizens rather than outwardly towards the world's problems and other countries' problems. Obviously, that's not the case. All you need to do is look at what is happening here. Leaving Minneapolis, deploying to the Persian Gulf, couldn't hack it fighting Antifa, fighting that nurse and the lesbian poet. That was too dangerous. But we're over there fighting Iran's 1 million-man army. All you need to do is look at what's happening. And yet you have Trump's biggest defenders on Twitter every day saying, don't black pill. If you're not on board with this, well, you're not serious. Grow up. That's not how politics works. Tell me then, please, how politics works. I'm waiting for Trump's biggest defenders, for J.D. Vance's biggest defenders. Tell me how politics works. At what point do we get what we want? We voted for law and order and borders how many times since 2016? Voted for that in 16, 18, 20, 22, 24. We're coming up on 26. When do we get it? When is that even a priority? When are they even going to try? I'm really unhappy with what we're getting. I'm growing impatient. You tell me now I'm not serious. I just don't know how it works. I need to grow up. We can't just burn it all down. Okay, well, you tell me, at what point do we liberate the country? At what point do we stop liberating the Middle East and we start liberating us? We're talking about Iranian protesters and Iranians' aspirations for freedom and Iran. And okay, what about Minnesota? What about New York? What about Illinois? What about California? Can we liberate this? And they say, well, we can't do that. Surely it's possible. Surely. If you could kidnap Maduro, if you could go into Iran and bomb Fordo with a 50,000-pound bomb, if we could have half of our Air Force over there, surely we could handle Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's not even that big of a city. Like, that's a start. How many Somalians even live there? Like 90,000? Seriously? So how many are in the Revolutionary Guard? 500,000? You can't deport 90,000 Somalis that are just idiots. They're just like disorganized idiots. They got bows and arrows. They don't even have a legal right to be here. Can't do it. They're setting up an autonomous zone. Renee Good, the lesbian, and the other guy, the male nurse, they're setting up a autonomous zone with a couple of garbage cans in the intersection. Oh my, no, we can't send ICE in there. Too dangerous. Yeah, but let's go and fight the whole Middle East again. Let's go and fight Hezbollah, the Houthis, the PMF, IRGC, the Ayatollah. They're not even trying. They're just not even trying to make the case anymore. And that's when I say I'm out. I'm for America first. No regime change in Iran. Let Israel figure it out. Let them fight their own war. Let's figure out what's going on over here. We should not even be thinking about the Middle East until there are 0 Haitians in Springfield, 0 Somalis in Minneapolis, 0 Venezuelans in Houston. Then we can figure out, everybody else's issues. We have the situation in Mexico. The whole country just blew up, cartel violence. We have our hands full over here. So, like I said, I don't really have too much to add in terms of predicting the outcome here. We don't have a ton of new information. And we spent all week breaking down the force posture over there and what that indicates about where it's headed. But at what point do the middle American radicals that served as the base for Trump's movement, at what point do we wake up and realize we are being screwed? We are not getting what we wanted. And we have to get up and say that loudly. We have to let them know. Who? The GOP. Let the Republican Party know. I'm a voter. I'm a registered Republican. I'm not me in particular, but you. I'm a registered Republican. I'm a conservative. I'm a white male. I'm a Christian. Maybe I voted for Trump once, twice, 3 times in the past. This is bullshit. This is not what we were promised. We've been fighting this battle for 10 years now, and we still don't have a border wall. We have more illegals here now than we did 10 years ago. That's insane. If anything, the cities are worse after the summer of love with George Floyd. Cost of living, it's all worse. At what point are people going to take their own side, stand up and say, I'm not getting what I voted for. I'm not voting again. You didn't earn my vote. Sorry. You sold me something in 2024. You didn't deliver it. I'm not coming out in 2026. Now, you can figure out what to do after that loss. GOP has to get obliterated in 26. They have to be annihilated. You got to send them a message. I saw somebody say recently, they said, the GOP is not going to be hurt if you don't vote and they lose their majority. Yes, they will. Yes, they will. And we need to send them home. Send them home, hurt the GOP, and let them know in 2028, we need a regime change in the Republican Party. That's the only thing that's going to work for us. I'm not voting. I'm not working for the GOP if this is the outcome. And I say that. I'm a real human being, okay? I'm a real 27-year-old male, paying taxes, white guy, very conservative, partially Hispanic, okay? Full disclosure. Living in Cook County. Okay, I'm an American. I'm a constituent. I'm a citizen. And life has not gotten better for me in the past 10 years. There is not any more law and order. Economy's not better. There's still tons of illegals. I am not satisfied. I'm not happy. And I should be. Democrats get elected and look at what they do for their people. That's all you need to know. Democrats get elected and they say, how are we going to make healthcare more affordable for our voters? I know, let's make the Republicans pay for it. Hey, why not, right? That's what Democrats do for their people. Democrats say, we're just going to forgive your student loans. All these college students and young people that voted for us, yeah, we're just going to eliminate their debt. Is that good for the country? Probably not. I don't know. But they do things for their voters. They get elected on affordability, things like that. They say, we're going to make healthcare affordable. We're going to wipe out your loans. We're going to create reparations for blacks. We're going to allow your immigrant relatives or your foreigner relatives to come in under chain migration. We're actually going to tangibly do things for you. Again, I'm not a Democrat. I think that's ruining the country. It's not sustainable long term. But that's just like a taste of what it is to vote for your own interest. And over here on the GOP side, we make excuses for why we're getting screwed royally. They're selling us a war with Iran while they're telling us we can't deport people. Can't deport 1 million people. You're out of luck. Go to war with Iran? By any means necessary, Netanyahu. Yes, sir. Right? Am I insane? Deport a mere 1 million people in a year. Impossible. Cannot be done. But the judges, but the Democrats, but the protesters, problems, always problems. Topple a government with 90 million people and 1 million soldiers? No one ever said it would be easy. But where there's a will, there's a way. It will be done, Prime Minister. It will be done. Like, we are being screwed here. So people should not lose sight of things. The timing is very interesting, isn't it? Pull out of Minneapolis, go to the Persian Gulf. Yes, just what we ordered, right? Just what this whole thing was always all about. Isn't that the conceit of MAGA and Trumpism and America First? Ignoring the actual quality of life of native-born people to go fight foreign wars for special interests in Israel? If that's the program, why didn't we just vote for Jeb Bush? Why didn't we just vote for Marco Rubio the first time? What was the point of all of it if this is the outcome? Am I crazy? They can spin it any type of way, But there is no border wall. There are no mass deportations. We don't even have the tariffs. What we do have, Assad is gone. Iran is going. Like that is what we do have on lock. Harvard has a Jewish president. I can sleep easier at night knowing Shabbos Kestenbaum, his conscience will not be offended by the protests against the genocide in Gaza because Harvard now has a Jewish president. Thank God. So anyway, that's the situation in Iran. But like I said, no other major developments. We will be watching that very closely throughout the week. And one thing I will say about it, so I told you on Thursday, there have been these reports, first in the Wall Street Journal, I believe on Thursday, and then today in the New York Times. So these are two different reports, but they both say the same thing. I think in Axios as well. They say that Trump is considering a limited, narrow strike on Iran to extract capitulation. Hit Iran very lightly, very softly, in the hopes that Iran will agree to a deal. And by that, I mean agree to the ultimatum, which is to give up their nuclear enrichment, give up everything, and surrender to the United States. And then, if that doesn't work, then Trump is considering a more thorough, sustained strike, which is aimed at toppling the government. And that would be weeks long. We're talking weeks of heavy, hard air power all the time, blowing up their missile launch platforms, blowing up their Air Force, air defense, government, military leadership, all this stuff, in the hopes that eventually the regime just crumbles. And that's not really going to work. I don't believe in that option, but that's sort of the idea. The only thing that's new is that Trump has now publicly denied these claims. So this is being said in the Wall Street Journal, in the New York Times, I believe elsewhere too, but these are some exclusives. And they say Trump wants to do this limited strike, and then if that doesn't work, then he's going to do more. Now Trump has said on Truth Social that is false. He said there are no doubts within his camp. There's no reservations. He said everybody is on board. And if we go to war with Iran, then we're going to war. It's not going to be a wait and see approach. It's not going to be a surgical strike and then see what happens. Trump has confirmed it's a deal or it's nothing. We're either getting a capitulation or we're going to war. And as you know, as I've said over the past couple weeks, I don't think we're getting a deal. There's been so much talk in the papers about these negotiations and concessions being made and last-ditch diplomatic efforts. Long story short, when you strip away all of the rumors and hearsay and all this stuff, what you'll find is that at the bottom of it all, the fundamental positions have not changed. Washington has a red line on enrichment, and so does Iran. They're just the opposite. Washington's red line is that Iran must give up enrichment completely. No token enrichment, no 3-year restrictions, none of that. Washington is demanding give up your entire stockpile and give up enrichment, and that's it. We can do a consortium in Saudi Arabia. We can export enriched uranium to you so that we can control it, interdict it if necessary, but we are not letting you have that native capability. On the flip side, Iran says, we are never giving up enrichment. It is our right. It is our pride. We're never giving it up. The most that they have offered is that they might give up half of their stockpile of highly enriched uranium, and they might agree to temporary reductions in the level of enrichment. But that is as far as they have taken it so far. Now, if there's going to be a deal, one of these positions has to change. Either Iran is going to have to surrender, capitulate, this is the word that Witkoff used, and they're going to have to just give it up and make themselves completely vulnerable and defenseless. That's one scenario. Then you have a deal. In the other scenario, Washington will have to agree to something less than zero enrichment and a total forfeiture of the stockpile. they're going to have to agree that Iran can enrich at a low level for a period of time in exchange for sanctions relief and monitoring and compliance. Now, this is how you know that a deal is never going to happen. At least this is my heuristic, and I guess time will tell. This is my insight. How do you resolve this equation? The reason that Iran will never give it up is because if they do, they can expect that Israel will go to war anyway. And that is liable to happen. Israel will sabotage any deal like that. Any deal that doesn't include missiles and proxies, Israel's going to sabotage anyway. If Iran gives up its nuclear hedge, that just gives Israel the opportunity to strike Iran with impunity. And they might do that anyway. So I don't think it's in the cards that Iran is going to fold. On the other side, the United States cannot accept anything less than zero enrichment because in 2015, when the United States made the initial Iranian nuclear deal, it was the same program. It was sanctions relief, monitoring and compliance in exchange for temporary reduction in the level of enrichment for uranium. That was the protocol in 15. We'll relieve the sanctions, we'll get your economy going, but in exchange, we need to ensure that you're not enriching uranium past a certain limit. That was the original framework in 15. Now, in the interceding 11 years, Iran has been significantly weakened. Their proxies have been neutralized, their nuclear program has been set back years, and their missiles, well, we don't know the status of them, but perhaps their offensive and defensive capabilities have been degraded as well. So the United States cannot, after 10 years, after all this time and all this fighting and sabotage and everything, with Iran much weaker than they were then, cannot now agree to the same deal that allows Iran to have a native enrichment capability. That will be seen as a strategic defeat. If we scrapped the original deal because it wasn't good enough, and then we went to war with Iran and we bombed them and sanctioned them and did all these things to them, and they survived, and in the end, they got a deal that is as good, if not better, than when they started, then that is a major strategic defeat. And in the end, Iran will be able to claim victory. We didn't give up our enrichment. We didn't give up our nuclear program. We endured the worst of maximum pressure, the worst that the U.S. had to throw at us, and we got what we wanted. So we cannot come off of that red line. It's never going to happen, in my opinion. And that leaves us to a war with Iran. The question is just when. When and how and in what way, that's the only question. Will there be a decisive air campaign now? That seems less likely because I don't even think that's possible. But will there be imminent military action? That is very likely. The question is just when does that decisive confrontation occur? Do we hit Iran really hard now? Set them back many years in terms of missiles, nuclear, and the rest of it? Do we decapitate the regime? And then maybe a period of time passes where Israel and the United States are backing secessionist groups, anti-government groups of different stripes, liberal groups, maybe different ethnic factions, royalist factions, you never know. Maybe we go in, we degrade their security apparatus that allows CIA and Mossad to come in, stir the pot, and then you get another round of protests. And then we topple. But the point is, a decisive confrontation, military confrontation, is all but inevitable. Again, the question is just, what's the timeline? What's the strategy? What is the level of U.S. commitment? And I guess we'll see in the next 2 weeks what that's going to look like. But that's the situation in Iran. Like I said, we'll monitor that. I do want to move on. I want to get into our featured story tonight, which is about Tucker Carlson's interview with the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. And this is a very important narrative. You might not think it's a big deal. You might not think it's a big news story, but it is a really big deal. Because as I've said for the past couple of years, One of the biggest things that is happening in the world and in the United States is that the American public and the world are turning against Israel and maybe turning against organized Jewry as a force. And here's the thing about this show. This is maybe the only show that deals in reality. A lot of people look at my show and they think, oh, that's the Jew show. That's the show where they talk about Jews and they think Jews run everything, and that's the flavor of the show. And I reject this. That is how someone who considers themselves to be objective or mainstream might look at it. I look at it almost in reverse. This is the objective and mainstream show where we talk about the fact, okay, the proven fact that organized Jewry controls the West. That's not really controversial. It's not like it's a secret. They're not hiding it. It's just true. Okay, when you look at the TikTok deal, you see their fingerprints all over it. It's Larry Ellison. When you look at the Warner Brothers Paramount acquisition, their fingerprints are all over it. It's not subtle. When you look at Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, Columbia, again, they're all over that. When you look at who propelled Trump into office, almost everything to do with October 7th. The examples like this are countless. CBS, AIPAC, foreign aid, you name it, ADL, trusted flaggers, censorship, it's all there, okay? Now, the reason that most shows don't talk about this is because there is a infrastructure in place. It's like a racket where anybody that acknowledges this or talks about it, I should say, in a bad way, gets utterly destroyed. They get flagged as an anti-Semite, a Jew hater, isolated, neutralized. You talk about this topic, you acknowledge this reality, you express that you're unhappy with this predicament or you're critical of it. Maybe you're just a goy. Jews can talk about it all day. If you're a Jew in Hollywood, you can write in the LA Times, Jews run Hollywood. And they do, and they did. And you can Google that. There's an article like that from 15 years ago. But if you're a goy and you talk about this, big problems. So you know how the story goes. You talk about this, you get destroyed. Consequently, almost no one talks about this. So why am I discussing this? Because one of the biggest developments in the past couple of years is that people are starting to become aware of this predicament that we are in. For many years, there was a silence and omerta around this subject because of censorship, blacklisting, cancel culture, whatever you want to call it. You know what it looks like. You know what it is. And now all of a sudden, everybody is aware. Jews run the West. China runs China. Russia runs Russia. Muslims run Iran. Jews run the West. They run America. They run Europe. And you can't fuck with them because they have all the power. And if you have a problem with them, they destroy you. They use that power to hurt you. And it's only recently that people are becoming hip about AIPAC and Israel's wars and the influence of Mossad and Jewish billionaires and their predilection for their motherland, for the mothership, and the cancellation apparatus, which is a part of it also. Now, how we talk about this issue is almost just as important as the fact that we are talking about it. It's very important, in other words, that we get it right. How do we unring the bell? How do we undo this situation? How do we get to a point where Americans are in control of America? America First patriots are in control of America? Well, we have to identify the problem. And then we have to become conscious of it and organize politically against it. So that's the solution from a very stripped down point of view. Now, to this point, we have this interview between Tucker Carlson and Mike Huckabee. And as you know, Tucker is one of the most prominent critics of Israel. And many people consider him to be a force for the truth and a force for good. He's bringing awareness to the subject. He's driving this conversation forward. He has a massive platform, a lot of credibility coming from Fox News, and he's using that platform to shine a spotlight on this issue. He's talking about it in a very frank way. So people say he's one of the good guys. Now, to that end, he had this interview with the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, and Tucker really put the screws in him. As you may or may not know, Mike Huckabee is a Christian Zionist. So from the point of view of his theology, he is literally a religious zealot. Even though he's a Christian, he worships Israel, worships the modern Jewish state of Israel, worships modern Jews. He believes in a certain interpretation of biblical prophecy. He believes that the people that call themselves Jews today have some special role in the end of the world. And so we basically have to treat them as though they are our betters. And it doesn't matter what they do and what they say and how wicked they are and how much they hate us or take advantage of us. We have to look at them as God's chosen people. And even though we have problems with them now, in the end, the prodigal son, they're going to all come back and they're going to be reconciled and it's all going to be good. And so this is their belief. Now think of it. This is actually a very perverse situation when you consider it. Because the purpose of an ambassador is they're supposed to represent our interests to that other country. We have an ambassador in France. They're supposed to represent American interests in Paris. We have an ambassador to the United Kingdom. They're supposed to represent our interests to that country. But if our ambassador to Israel has a religious idolatry of Israel, well, like, who's this guy working for? Is he working for us or is he working for them? Is his job to represent the interest of Americans to the Jews in Israel? Well, if he's a Christian Zionist and he literally worships the Jews in Israel, I don't know, seems like they're kind of his boss. Seems like they kind of outrank the government here. And so in reality, his job is to represent Israel to us. And you can see that in the way that he talks and the stuff that he does. And this is some of what Tucker highlighted during the interview. This is well known in these circles. If you know anything about Huckabee, he's from the South. He's from Arkansas. He believes in this dispensationalist Christian theology. He's from Fox News, like Tucker. And so we know what he's about. Tucker is shining a spotlight on this very perverse situation. It's actually a scandal. And no matter how you cut it, it's deeply wrong and messed up. And you could say that as a first principle, our government represents our interests. And insofar as our constitutionally created representative government hires, nominates ambassadors, secretaries, other personnel, those people, their job is to represent us too. So whether that ambassador is to Israel or anywhere else, his job is to represent our representative constitutional government. It's not an Israel thing. It's not a Jew thing. You could say from a first principle, this is all wrong. Our ambassador to China should represent us. Our ambassador to Japan, Brazil, Mexico should represent us. You don't get some Mexican flag waving Mexican patriot who is still mad about the Mexican war with America to represent us in Mexico City. No, you get an American. Similarly, it follows with Huckabee. So Tucker does this interview to shine a light on this, and he does a pretty good job, I think. He is really putting the screws in Huckabee. The pressure's up. He's asking intense questions, and one of the best parts of the interview is this. We'll talk about some of the good things and some of the bad things. I think the highlight is that Tucker highlighted he highlighted this arrangement in general, but more than that, he highlighted something which is very interesting about Israel. When you talk about Israel, you can't talk about it like any other country. If we were to talk about Germany and Italy and Denmark, right-wing people like to say, well, those are their own countries. They have their own problems. They should defend themselves. NATO should maybe increase their defense budget. If they're so afraid of Russia, they should field their own army. They should make their own tanks and missiles and airplanes and so on. When it comes to Israel, however, and our obligation to defend them, and when it comes to Israel's conduct in war and diplomacy, people like to say, well, they're special, they're different. And what you tend to hear when you talk about this is, well, Israel has this right to exist. That is their go-to. That is literally their playbook. And I'm not making this up. They have a playbook. They literally do market research. How do we deal with these conversations? Who's we? Any Jew. How do pro-Israel Jews deal with these conversations when the Goyim ask us, why are we defending you? Why are we fighting your wars? What do we say? Well, the Jews, like a science, they figured out, here's how we short circuit that discussion. We say, well, does Israel have a right to exist? This is how they shut all that down. You say, Israel's killing civilians. Israel's destroying all their infrastructure. Israel's killing 100,000 plus people. They say, yeah, well, but does Israel have a right to exist? And you kind of go, wait, I don't know. Let me think about that for a moment. Because if you say no, then what are you saying? That Israel should be annihilated? Do you think that they should be genocided and wiped off the map? I don't think anyone supports that. I don't think I should say almost anybody supports that. In America, at least. I don't think most people would say, yeah, they should all be annihilated with nuclear bombs. So you go, I don't know if the answer is no, but you also don't want to say yes, because if you say yes, then it's like, now am I involved in a chain of questioning? Clearly, they're not asking that question in good faith. Well, does Israel have a right to exist? Well, I don't really know what that means to affirm that. I mean, does anyone have a right to exist? Do I have a right to exist? What does that entail? I have a right to exist. You're making me nervous. Can I now kill you? Can I slit your throat because I feel uncomfortable? Is my right to exist limitless? Is it not bounded by anything? Like, how do we think about these things? So it's sort of, but now we're thinking about everything else. Whereas we were talking about the genocide and the massacre and all these kinds of things, now we're thinking about this abstract question about natural law. And so they say, does Israel have a right to exist? And you go, I guess. And they go, okay, well, then they have a right to defend themselves, don't they? Palestine doesn't think they have a right to exist. And then you're walking down this path towards, if Israel has a right to exist, then it can defend itself. If it can defend itself, then it can do whatever it thinks is necessary for its security. And maybe that means deporting every Palestinian, and maybe that means killing everybody, and maybe that means a genocide. And they, in a perverted, twisted logic, they get you to this point where you're saying, oh, well, maybe it's okay. Well, Tucker flips that on its head, and Tucker presses Huckabee and says, okay, so he's pressing Huckabee on these questions. What is a Christian Zionist? What is a Zionist? And Huckabee falls back on the old classic. Huckabee says, well, does Israel have a right to exist? I'm a Christian, I'm a Zionist. What is a Zionist? It means Israel has a right to exist. Do you think Israel has a right to exist? And Tucker throws it back on Huckabee. Pause, and says, well, what does that mean? Where does this right come from? And now Huckabee is on the back foot and says, oh, well, it comes from international law. And Tucker goes, oh, international law, really interesting. Those things that Israel breaks all the time. Funny you mentioned that. International law. Oh, you mean those things that Israel breaks constantly since they came into existence? You sure about that? Huckabee goes, well, there's these conventions, and there's the Balfour Declaration, and there's this and this, and stumbles all over that answer. And then Huckabee arrives at maybe the more important question, the central question. Huckabee says they have a biblical right to exist. It's a God-given right. Why? Because God told the Jews in the Old Testament, this is all yours. And so that's their promised land. We were promised this land 6 million years ago. So it's ours. Now, we can kill anybody that gets in our way because of that. We were promised this land. Now get the fuck out of the way or we'll kill you. As a matter of fact, we'll kill everybody. We'll kill the whole world because it's ours. Who cares we haven't been here for 2,000 years? We're here to collect. So Huckabee says it's because God promised Abraham this land. Be fruitful and multiply. This land belongs to your descendants. And Tucker points out a problem with this land grant from God. He says, well, actually in the book of Genesis, there is a deed that God gives the Jewish people, and it talks about the specifications of the land. If you say that Israel has their right to exist from God, well, let's talk about God's right that he gave them. Because if you read the fine print, what it says is that Israel is entitled to everything from the Nile River in Egypt all the way to the Euphrates River in Syria. So do they have a right to all of that? If Israel has a right to exist, and its right to exist comes from the Old Testament, well, if the Old Testament says their right is good from these two rivers, from the Nile to the Euphrates, then where does it end? Did they have a right to the modern day state of Jordan and Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Egypt? Because if that's where you're sourcing this land claim, then clearly you would have to say that they do. It's the word of God after all, isn't it? It's the inspired scripture. And this is the story. This is from Politico. It turns out that the Arab countries didn't like the answer. Mike Huckabee says, well, yeah. He says, yeah, they do. Israel does have a right to all of that. Israel has a right to all those countries. And Tucker goes, really? Huckabee goes, well, I don't think they're going to take that, and that's not really what they're talking about now. Tucker says, well, you just said they have a right to it. And now, understandably, almost every Muslim country mentioned in this has condemned the U.S. ambassador to Israel. This is from Politico. It says, quote, pardon me, actually, I have the wrong story up. It says, quote, Arab and Muslim nations condemned comments by the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, who said Israel has a right to much of the Middle East. Huckabee made the comments in an interview with Tucker Carlson that aired on Friday. Carlson said that according to the Bible, the descendants of Abraham would receive land that today would include essentially the entire Middle East, and asked Huckabee if Israel had a right to all of that land. Huckabee replied, quote, it would be fine if they took it all. It would be fine if they took it all, he said. However, Huckabee added that Israel was not looking to expand its territory and has a right to security in the land that it legitimately holds. Really, they're not looking to expand its territory? So what do you call civilian settlements then? What has Israel actually done other than expand since 1948, since 1900, since 1893? What are you talking about? Israel's not looking to expand. Do you mean like that far yet? What do you mean Israel's not looking to expand? That's all it does. That's all what did they do in 67 other than expand into Gaza, the West Bank, the Sinai, the Golan? That's all that they do. What do you call a civilian settlement in the West Bank other than expansion? What do you call what they're doing right now in Syria when the Assad regime fell and they blew up all their hardware and then Israel just kept going into the suburbs of Damascus and into the Druze-occupied southern Syria? What do you call that other than expansion? What is it when they're bombing Iran, bombing Iraq, bombing Syria, bombing Yemen? What else would you call that? So he goes, well, they have a right to it, but they're not looking to expand. And the little qualifier that he left off is, well, they're not looking to expand to those places right now. But he's effectively acknowledging if they wanted it, he would defend their claim to it. So what is that? And what does that say about our foreign policy? U.S. foreign policy says and dictates We want stability in the Middle East. What is our end game in the Middle East? Well, considering that there is so much energy there, oil and natural gas, our interest is that that region is stable so that commerce is uninterrupted. Trade routes are uninterrupted in the Red Sea and in the Persian Gulf. We want the Strait of Hormuz clear. We want the Bab el-Mandeb and the Suez Canal clear. And we want the oil to flow. And to that end, we want stability. What's more, our real geostrategic interests are now in the Indo-Pacific. Now it matters far more defending the first island chain in the Pacific. The Strait of Malacca is more important now maybe than the Strait of Hormuz. And so we're actually looking to extricate ourselves from that region through collective security arrangements. Same thing in Europe. We want to hand off deterrence against Russia to NATO in Europe. We would like to hand off stability, anti-terrorism in the Middle East to our allies there. And Israel is not our only ally. As a matter of fact, they're not even the most important ally. We're handing off those obligations to Egypt, to Saudi Arabia, to Qatar, Turkey, which is a NATO country. So there are other countries in the Middle East. To the extent that we have an ambassador in Israel, he should be in lockstep with our foreign policy, which is we want to end conflicts. We don't want adventurism. We don't want revanchism, expansion. We don't want revision. We want status quo. And so our end game should be, we want Syria to stabilize. We want Iraq to stabilize. We want those borders to be fixed and defended and permanent. So in other words, if there are people in Israel, and there are, that have designs and aspirations to go to war with all their neighbors and expand their territory, that is against our interests. To go to war in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, wherever else, to dominate the region, that is destabilizing. That is contrary to our interests. For Israel to be unchained, to pursue regional hegemony is destabilizing. That is diametrically opposed to what is best for us and what we want. And yet, our ambassador to Israel seems to have not just Israel's foreign policy, but literally the most expansionist version of it. Think about that. It's not just that Huckabee is gung-ho about taking Gaza and taking the West Bank, which he is. He says, we shouldn't even say Gaza and West Bank. We should say Judea and Samaria. We shouldn't even say Palestinian. That isn't real. So he not only has Israel's foreign policy in the things they're currently doing, he has Israel's foreign policy in all the things their most radical members want to do in a long timeline. In other words, that would be like if Israel's ambassador to the United States was like some manifest destiny nut job like me that wants to invade the entire Western Hemisphere. That's Mike Huckabee. He says, well, they have a right to take Iraq, the Sinai, Egypt, Saudi, Jordan. They have a right to all of that. And I would support them taking it because it's theirs, because God gave it to them, but they're not doing that right now. So why even talk about it? Why talk about it? What are you doing working for us? Isn't that insane that you're an Israeli partisan? You're a Jewish nationalist? And this is the tension. Are you a Jewish nationalist or are you an American nationalist? Because these are two different nations. And when I say Jewish nationalist, do not mistake what I mean. I don't mean Zionist. There is a Jewish nation. It is transnational. Jewish nationality, feelings of peoplehood, feelings of togetherness, this is transnational. And it is not exclusive to Israel. It's not restricted to Israel. As a matter of fact, it's independent of Israel. Feelings of Jewish nationalism, pride in Jewish identity, Jewish culture, Jewish chauvinism, Jewish peoplehood. This exists in the Jewish community worldwide, in America, in Europe, in the Middle East. And these people are loyal to each other. They see themselves as distinct from everybody else, and they see themselves as exceptional, better than everybody else. And they also see themselves as under siege. So they're at war with everybody else, okay? That's a Jewish nationalist. I'm an American nationalist. Where does America come from? America comes from Europe. America's a Christian country. That's our theology. That's our heritage. What are we influenced by? In Washington, D.C., we are influenced by Rome. We are influenced by Greece. We're influenced by Greek Hellenistic culture. That's the architecture. That's our constitutional system. That's free speech. That's our separation of powers, checks and balances. It comes from Europe. It comes from Hellenistic culture. It comes from the Roman Empire. It comes from Christianity. And Christianity is its own thing. It's distinct, altogether separate from the Talmud and Jewish mysticism and Zionism and all this kind of stuff. We are our own civilization. I'm an American nationalist. I see the influence of Spain, of Portugal, of England, of France, of the Germans, the Irish, the Roman Empire, the Greeks. I see the influence of this on our civilization. That's the civilization I'm a part of. Jewish nationalists have a different story. Ask Joe Lonsdale. Ask Alex Karp. Ask Bronze Age pervert. Ask Bari Weiss. Netanyahu. Their story is enmity with our people. Their story is about how they defeated the Persians and the Babylonians and the Assyrians. And then the Romans took their land, and they hate the Romans that destroyed their temple and kicked them out. And they hate the Catholic monarchs, hate them. Hate the Catholic monarchs that try to suppress their religion with the Inquisition, burning their holy books, expelling them. They hate the Tsar, the third Caesar, the Caesar of Russia. They hate the great European empires. They hate the Germans. They hate the Spanish because of Philip II. They hate the French because of Louis XIV. They hate the English because of Edward. They hate the Romans because of Titus. And they hate the church because they see the church as idolatrous. And so when you see a Joe Lonsdale, he's a Maccabean. He's a Hebrew. He's a Jewish nationalist. And he sees Rome as just another in a long line of empires and peoples and nationalities destroyed by the Jews. And isn't that kind of the whole thing? Do you know what Goyim actually means? It doesn't really mean cattle. Goyim means the nations, the nationalities. The Jews are a nation up until recently without a state, without a territory, a nation, a people, a tribe, here, there, everywhere, it doesn't matter. And they are exclusive and they are their own. We are a nation. We are the nations. They are the Jews. We are the Goyim. We are the other nations. I'm part of the American nation. The American nation is formed out of other nations, discovered by Italian explorers, Spanish, Portuguese explorers, settled by English settlers, wilderness tamed by the French, the English, the Spanish, built by the Germans, the Irish, yes, the Slavs, the Polish, the Czech, Swedish, Finnish, Norwegian, Russian. Okay? And all of our theology, all of our philosophy, our culture, it comes from the Greeks, the Etruscans. It comes from our nations. We are a distinct nation. So Mike Huckabee is on the side of the Jewish nation. The Jewish nation's story, their chauvinism, their exceptionalism, their ambitions for a greater Israel. You know, everybody dreams of a greater whatever, okay? Serbia dreams of a greater Serbia. Russia dreams of a greater Russia. Italy dreams of a greater, they want Slovenia. Serbia wants Kosovo. Russia wants Ukraine. And yes, Israel wants their whole Middle East. Whose side are you on? I want a greater America. I don't care about a greater Israel. As a matter of fact, make Israel as small as possible. Because they are a threat. They're a threat because their Jewish nation reaches into ours. And it doesn't go the other way. The Jewish nation transcends borders, and their people that they count among their ranks are powerful. And they have a vast reach. The Jewish nation reaches into the core of our country, into all of its organs. That's a problem. And they also have their own home base. They also have their own headquarters. That makes them a threat. They've got 300 nuclear bombs. They've got missiles. They've got an intelligence apparatus, and they've got their people everywhere. The Jewish nation reaches into Russia, into Europe, into America. Whose side are you on? You can't be a Jewish nationalist and an American nationalist. You have to pick one. Now, you can be Jewish and be an American nationalist, but that means you need to assimilate. You need to recognize America as your only home. You need to burn the boats. But if you're one of these Jews that has a chip on your shoulder and you're worried about Israel and you're worried about all this other stuff, and you talk about how Europeans have anti-Semitism in their DNA, you're not on the team. How could you possibly be America first? And this is our own ambassador. Our own ambassador is not America first. He's not even an American partisan. He's not even part of the American nation. Firmly part of the Jewish nation, advocating for the Jewish nation. And that's not what we are about at all. This is America first. This is what our allies had to say about it in the Middle East. His comments sparked immediate backlash from neighboring Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the League of Arab States. Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry described the comments as extremist and unacceptable. Egypt's foreign ministry called his comments a blatant violation of international law, saying Israel has no sovereignty over the occupied Palestinian territory or other Arab lands. Huckabee has long opposed the idea of a two-state solution for Israel and the Palestinian people. In an interview last year, he said he does not believe in referring to Arab descendants of people living in British-controlled Palestine as Palestinians. In the latest interview, Carlson pressed Huckabee about his interpretation of Bible verses from the book of Genesis, where he said God promised Abraham and his descendants land from the Nile to the Euphrates. Now, think about it in terms of what is best for us. Like I said, we actually have other allies. Egypt is our ally. Saudi Arabia is our ally. Qatar, the Emirates, Turkey, Armenia. These are our allies. Armenia is a Christian country to boot. What about them? And what about us? What is best for us is that the Middle East is stable. What is best for us is that the militant elements of the Palestinians are pacified so that there can be a two-state solution, and then we can leave. There can be a two-state solution. Israel can make treaties with Saudi Arabia and other countries, and then we can leave. And we can get the oil from Saudi Arabia, and we can get the money in their petrodollar facilities into our economy, and we can focus on other problems. That's what we want. What Israel wants is to take the West Bank and Gaza and then terraform the region. Egypt is mobilizing in the Sinai because they're worried about this, digging tunnels. And Turkey is getting worried. Now they extend their arm into Syria. Saudi Arabia says they won't make a deal unless there's a two-state solution. The Middle East is destabilizing because of Israel's revisionist Zionist ambitions, because of these greater Israel ambitions. And again, our ambassador supports this to the detriment of our own foreign policy. And by the way, this greater Israel thing, it is as Jewish as it gets. And they want it. The revisionist Zionists, going back to the foundations of the state of Israel, revisionist Zionists like Zeev Jabotinsky, who founded the Israeli military or elements of it, they believe that Israel should take all of Jordan. They believe that Israel should be as big as possible. The revisionist Zionists, which founded the Likud party, they believe this also. They believe Israel should have the Sinai. They believe Israel should have the Golan, southern Lebanon. They believe they should have the land east of the Jordan River. They believe they should have it all. As a matter of fact, Israel's contemporary ministers in government believe this. Their national security minister and their finance minister, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, they both believe in this. They have given speeches in front of podiums that depict a greater Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates. So it's not like this is some conspiracy theory or some fringe view. These are the foundations of the state of Israel, and there are contemporary, powerful political parties in Israel. They either descend from that tradition or they uphold it still, and they believe in this project. And that leads me to this other part about Tucker's interview. You know, everything that we're talking about has to do with the Jewishness of Israel. Suffice to say, Israel's right to exist, where does it come from? The Bible. So Israel's Jewishness is really at stake here. What it is, what that means, is it legitimate, right? Where does the legitimacy of the modern state of China come from? It doesn't come from the Bible. It comes from this diplomatic thought in the 70s because of the result of a civil war in the 40s. Where does the People's Republic of China come from? Well, Mao Zedong won the Civil War, and eventually the U.S. made a deal, and that's where it comes from. Now, on some other level, they have their legitimacy from Confucius and from this idea that they are the Middle Kingdom. They're this 5,000-year-old culture. So there's this legal framework about the current regime, and there's this civilizational framework about their history in this region around this river and all the rest of it. It's, you could say, the Chineseness of China. And the same goes for other countries. Where does the sovereignty of a country like the United States come from? Well, the Revolution and the Constitution and the Declaration and this sort of thing. When we're talking about Israel's right to exist and why we have to defend them, and excuse me, my nose is itching, what makes them special, it has to do with the Bible. As we just laid out, where does that claim come from? Well, they say that the God of the Bible gave them the land. And even though they weren't living there for 2,000 years, they came back to collect on that. They got kicked out by the Romans, and so they lived in exile as a diaspora for 2,000 years, and now they're coming back. And what legitimized this return to their land? The Bible. So, at stake here is really that claim. If they're coming back to Israel, if they're coming back to this territory and claiming it, well, the question is, what does the Bible actually say? And about who and what people? And this is the part of Tucker's interview that I did not like at all. And I've heard this said a lot in this same conversation. People like to say, well, if Israel's right to exist is built upon this biblical claim, they want to attack the continuity of this biblical people. So if Israel has this right to exist because God told Abraham, your descendants get this territory, and people claiming to be Jews from Central and Eastern Europe came there in 1900 to make good on this, well, some people like to attack the continuity, the through line. And they like to say, well, are the modern Jews really those descendants of Abraham? In other words, are they really the beneficiary of that land grant? We might say, in ancient history, God gave this ancient people this land. Well, now some people showed up and they say, we are those people. And guys like Tucker want to say, okay, well, are you really the same guys? Do you have that lineage? If you do, well, then I guess we have to litigate that. But if you don't, then you have no claim. Maybe you're some kind of interloper. And maybe somewhere along the way, some other people wanted to hijack this and get in the middle of that process and say, well, we have this heritage, we're claiming it, and we're claiming the land that comes with it. And so in the same interview, and sort of along, you can maybe see the continuity here, along exactly the same line where Tucker says, where does Israel get its right to exist? What is that right? Tucker also questions the continuity of the Jewish people. And he says to Huckabee that all the Jews in Israel are Ashkenazi, and the Ashkenazi come from Central and Eastern Europe. That's actually what Ashkenazi means. It means German. And Yiddish is a form of German, or it's I should say it branched off of German at one point in time. And so Tucker says the prime minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is Polish. He's from Eastern Europe. What does he have to do with the Bible? What does he have to do with the people of the book and Abraham? And this is the story from Times of Israel. This is the quote. It says, Carlson also questioned whether modern Jews were the same nation as Jews in the biblical era. Carlson said, quote, God promised this land from modern-day Iraq to modern-day Egypt to this people, the Jews, Abraham's descendants. Who are his descendants now, and how do we know who they are? He said the current prime minister's ancestors weren't from here. Netanyahu on one side, his family's from Poland. They're from Eastern Europe. So how do we know that he has a connection to the people who God promised the land to? And this I didn't like, because as a matter of fact, let us just say this at the outset, it is a matter of fact that the Jews in Israel descend from the Middle East. The Mizrahi Jews, Sephardic Jews, and Ashkenazi Jews, they all descend from the Middle East. How do we know that, Tucker? Well, if this wasn't a rhetorical question and you actually bothered to ask, we have genetic testing. We do have modern genetic testing, which shows that Ashkenazi Jews have Levantine DNA that goes back 2,500 years to the Middle East. How do we know? There's no way to know. Well, we have science, we have genetic tests, and these people do have Levantine DNA. They did mix with Europeans. They have Eastern European DNA. They have Central European DNA, but they also have Levantine DNA. So these are not a people that are completely separate from Israel. They do have a legitimate claim that they are from the Middle East. So to pretend like we don't know or that it's even contestable is not true. And it's almost to the point of a reckless disregard for the truth. It's almost a lie of its own creation, a lie of its own type, to say, we can't possibly know. How do we know? Netanyahu comes from Poland. Okay, and, so what? Anglo-Saxons come from modern-day northern Germany and Denmark. Okay, so what? Yes, people from Poland also came from elsewhere. And some Polish people are native, and some Polish people came from the Middle East. And they are Jews. And to pretend as though we don't know that, to cast aspersions on this, and actually to insinuate that they have no Jewish DNA or that there's no way to know or that we don't know, is irresponsible. And honestly, I think it's a lie. To say this as a rhetorical question, asking, how do we know Netanyahu comes from Poland? It obfuscates the truth. Ashkenazi Jews have been proven scientifically with genetic testing to be descended from the Middle East, to be Levantine, to be Jews. So what are you really getting at here? Don't play dumb and stop asking rhetorical questions. They are Jewish, and we know they're Jewish. And this is something that I see all the time now. There's all sorts of different narratives coming from different places. Some anti-Zionist Jews or anti-Zionist leftists will use this argument. I see Muslims make this argument. They say these people in Israel are Europeans. They say it like it's a bad thing. They say Netanyahu's Polish. He's not a real Jew. Now, how do they characterize Israel? They characterize Israel as another white supremacist colony. That's where that goes. It's Muslim third worldists, leftists, and how they characterize this with that narrative is they say that Israel is just another example of white supremacist colonialism. They think we don't know any better. They say that Muslim, indigenous brown people are being displaced by whites from Europe. And their Judaism, well, that's just an elaborate facade for age-old white supremacy. And they think they're tricking everybody. That's that narrative. And I see this all day long. They say, those aren't real Jews. Those are Europeans. And what does this do other than serve to vilify white people? Huh? What does that actually do other than blame white people for what Jews are doing? Netanyahu is a Jew. Epstein is a Jew. Okay? Adelson, Ronald Lauder, these are Jews. They're visibly Jewish. They have Jewish lineage, Jewish DNA, and they are part of the Jewish nation. And to suddenly say, oh, no, they're Polish, they're German, now you're just blaming white people. And this is a way of maybe offloading the guilt onto a people we're more comfortable blaming. Haven't white people been blamed for enough of the world's problems? It's sort of like when conservatives used to love blaming white liberals for everything. BLM rioting? No, that's not black people looting the liquor store. That's white liberals pretending to be black. Remember that one? Because we're not comfortable blaming black people for problems. Only white people are ever the problem. Oh, you want to know who really runs the world? It's rich white people. Yeah, it's rich white liberals like Bill Gates. Because we're more comfortable blaming our own kind, our own rich people, our own women, our own young people. Yeah, blame the white college students, blame the white women, blame the wealthy white people, blame the white hipsters or hippies. What does that serve to do other than offload guilt from one ethnic minority to white people yet again? For leftists, for third worldists, for Muslims who can say Israel is a creation of the British Empire. It's a remnant of Sykes-Picot. It's a remnant of the old days of European colonialism. That's all that does, and I don't like that. Netanyahu's not a white guy. Netanyahu's a Jew. Okay? That's one. Now, I hear this other narrative all the time that they're Khazarian. You hear this one? Everybody says, it's really red-pilled. They're not really Jewish. They say that in the Middle Ages, the Khazarian Turks from the Central Asian steppe invaded Europe, and then they became Jewish. Why did they do this? To what end? Who knows? How this happened without being recorded in history? Anybody's guess. There's no rigor here. Nothing matters. Somewhere along the way in the Middle Ages, some Turkic mountaineers, some Turkic riders, horsemen from Central Asia came here, put down roots, and became Jewish. And so they're trans-Jewish. They're like transgenders. Now they're Jewish, and for whatever reason, they were just some minority in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and then got kicked around a bunch and then I guess, deluded themselves into thinking they're Jewish and decided to create Zionism. I don't even know what the idea is there. But that's the big idea, is that there was a break in the continuity, that somewhere along the way in the Middle Ages, some other people identified as Jewish, and the modern Jews are sort of a construction, a modern construction. And some other group of people engaged in constructivism and said, well, we're Jewish now. We have the Jewish identity. Now we're Israelis. And some people say, no, the really red-pilled thing is that this is the Khazarian Empire. This is some obscure Central Asian Turkic kingdom that became Jewish and has just been living the lie for 1,300 years. And now they're in Israel for some reason. I hear this one too. And once again, you have to wonder, what is even the point of that? And then you realize, who is the number one beneficiary of both of these narratives? It's Jews. Who is the number one? If you go out there and say, oh, Netanyahu's not a real Jew. As a matter of fact, none of the Israelis are. Who's the number one beneficiary of that narrative? Well, it would be Orthodox Jews. Maybe the Lubavitchers. It would be some group of Jews who believe that they are the real Jews. And they feel that they are being blamed for what Israel is doing or what Netanyahu is doing. Doesn't that sort of fit neatly? Tucker always likes to say, well, the problem isn't Jews. That's crazy. Don't talk about Jews. That's anti-Semitic. Tucker says the problem is neocons. Forget about Judaism, Jewishness, the Jewish nation, No, nothing to do with that. He literally sat face to face with me and seriously said that Judaism has nothing to do with Israel. Judaism has nothing to do with neoconservatism. Okay? The problem is neocons. The problem is Netanyahu. And Netanyahu is not even a real Jew. He's Polish. Interesting. And Candace Owens says it's Khazarians. Oh, Israel's an evil state, but Israel's all Khazarians. None of them are real Jews. So who's the beneficiary of this? Well, it's all those Israel-critical Jews, all these Orthodox Jews, conservatives in America, that they don't want to be blamed for what Netanyahu is doing, for what Israel is doing. But this is a lie. Like I said, genetically, these people are Jewish, in Israel and Netanyahu too. And maybe more importantly, everything that Israel is doing, it doesn't come from, people say it's these Frankists. This doesn't come from Jacob Frank. This doesn't come from the Central Asian steppe, and it doesn't come from Poland. You know where this idea comes from, that they have greater Israel? It comes from the Hebrew Bible. You know where this idea comes from, that they're going to wipe out all their enemies? It's the story of Amalek. It comes from the Hebrew Bible. In a word, it comes from Judaism. Where did Jews get the big idea that they can kill everybody that is an idolater? It comes from their Talmud. It comes from their holy book. You don't need to invent some esoteric satanic cult. You don't need to invent some interloping other ethnicity. This is who they are. They have the lineage to the original Jews who rejected and killed Christ, who were corrupted, who rejected their own Messiah, and were punished for it by being kicked out of their temple and their land. And all of these perverted ideas, well, that's just the Hebrew Bible without Christ. That's just the law without Christ. That's the Pharisees without Christ. That's where they get the idea that everybody that stands in their way should not be shown mercy or love. That's where they get the idea that they're going to wipe out the women and the children in pursuit of their birthright, in pursuit of their land. It comes from Judaism itself, this perverse, bastard religion that did not accept the Messiah. That's what Judaism is. It is a bastard religion. The Hebrew Bible had its fulfillment in Christ. That's what it is. That's who the prophets were. That's what the mark was on the doors in Egypt. That's what it's all pointing towards. That's what it was all for. That's what they paved the way to have in the end, from Adam and Eve, through Noah, through Abraham, through Moses, David, Solomon, all the way through to Christ. And now it's done. What exists now, what they call Judaism, halakhic, what they call the law, the Talmud, is a bastardization. It's effectively a form of a heresy. So who are we trying to protect when we say it's not those real Jews? I'm sorry, what's a real Jew? The Pharisees that put him on the cross? That's a real Jew? We're supposed to be okay with that? No. I see somebody say, Candace Owens said the other day, she goes, God's chosen would never do this. Hey, I have a news flash for you. It was God's chosen that put him on the cross, genius. What do you think happened there? Calvary, whatever happened there? She goes, God's chosen people would never be this heinous. I'm sorry, did you miss the ending there? Did you fall asleep before the end of the drama of the Gospels? That's the whole story. God's chosen people rejected their own Messiah, their own gift. They traded him for Barabbas. They demanded he be executed and crucified. He was betrayed by his own brother, his own disciple. And then you say, I can't believe they're doing this all the... Well, what do you think happens? 2,000 years without the light of Christ? They've got the Mishnah, they've got their commandments, they've got their traditions, their synagogues, their rabbis, but they don't have their temple. It was taken from them. They don't have the veil, the land. It was taken from them. And they don't have the Logos. They don't have the Christ. They don't have the light of God. So how could it be anything other than corrupted and perverted? And people are trying to go out and say, it's the Polish, it's a white supremacist thing, it's neocons, it's Khazarians. No, this is just these people now persisting. Genetically, they're Jewish. Culturally, they're Jewish. They derive their supremacist ideology, their national feelings, chauvinism from this text. And we have to be very clear about that. No, I'm sorry, we're not going to blame white people for Israel. Not going to happen. And we can't be deluded about the nature of the real issue here. And the reason I say it's an issue, it ties back into Jewish nationalism. When Joe Lonsdale says that young men should look up to Cyrus, the Jewish Messiah, you see this guy has not let go of his Jewish national feelings. When Steve Saylor says that if the Goyim ever found out that Jews were smarter than them, we would come for them with the pitchforks and torches, they have not let go of their Jewish nationalism. Same with Curtis Yarvin and his little lackey. Same with Alex Karp, who's afraid the Christians are going to throw him out of a window. Okay, we have to be realistic about what is going on here. And we can't say that all these people are just Khazarians living a lie, or they're Frankists keeping this dynastic secret that they're a cult. And we can't blame white people for them either, because that's not what it is. So, in many ways, the interview is very good. In other ways, the interview is deeply flawed. And this, ironically, or maybe not ironically, is Tucker's contention with me. When you see Tucker calling me an anti-Semite all the time, and when he goes and qualifies everything that he says by saying it has nothing to do with Jews and Judaism and Israel, keep this in mind. They want to keep the conversation on Netanyahu and neocons in Israel, and they don't want to talk about the bigger issue here. It's a story of peoples. It's a story of nations. And these things have a draw on us. Our mythology, our story, our parents, our nationality, it tugs on the heartstrings of men. And so to look at our country, which is being influenced and controlled by Jews, by a Jewish class, you have to look at their affinity for their Jewish nation. and stop pretending it's all ideological, looking for, ideas to blame. It's the neocons. It's people that feel a certain way. It's this group. And unless we get a handle on that and we promote a version of Jewish identity that is compatible with America, we're not really addressing the root cause here. And I'm not saying that people can't be Jewish, and I'm not saying that people can't embrace their Jewish identity. But it has to be done in a way with some deference to the country they reside in. And if they can't do it, then they can't have power over us. You want to be a Jewish supremacist? I don't care that much as long as you just live far the fuck away from me and you don't have $50 billion to spend in my elections. That's a problem. And you want to be Jewish and celebrate that and everything? Okay, good for you, but you better put America first. You got to look out for everybody in this country, and you got to recognize this is a Christian European country. That goes every way, shape, and form, not just for the immigrants. I see guys like Stephen Miller, they say, these brown people need to assimilate. No, you need to assimilate, you arrogant Jew. You need to assimilate. Stephen Miller, with his Jewish wife and his Jewish kids, and all they talk about is how Jewish they are and they're pro-Israel. And Stephen Miller, people want to give him kudos because he's against brown people and black people, telling them to assimilate. Hey, you first, pal, you arrogant Jew. You assimilate. Then we'll talk about the rest of these people. Here's the difference. Illegal immigrants, they're running they're running a corner store. You're the deputy chief of staff. So who's really the issue here? People talk about, these immigrants need to assimilate. Hey, I agree. I agree with you. But illegal immigrants, okay, they're picking berries. They're on a farm somewhere. Miriam Adelson is spending $100 million per cycle. So where's really the urgency? I mean, it's actually a little bit hard to pick, but the difference is one group seems to have a lot more agency and power, and you can never say this to them. And the other group, people have a field day. So those are the flaws of the interview. And I see this narrative being promoted. Don't be deceived by this. Don't be deceived. They do it with Epstein. They do it with Netanyahu. They want to say Epstein wasn't really Jewish. He's a vampire, cannibal, Khazarian. Netanyahu's Polish. He's a dude from Poland. What is that? That's not true, and I think it's a very deceptive narrative. I wonder who's really behind that, because it's being promoted. It's being promoted by Alexander Dugin. It's being promoted by Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Ian Carroll, Ron Unz. I don't like it. And it seems very Russian. That's my feeling. It seems very Russian. Seems like the Orthodox Jews like that little narrative. So Americans need to get hip, okay? We need to get wise, figure out what the real situation is. But that's that. We're going to move on. This is a 2-hour monologue, so we got to move on and get into the super chats. We're going to take a look at all this. We'll see what you guys have to say about this. Let me get set up here, and we'll see what we got going on. All right, let's take a look.
All right, let's get right to it. I disagree with Nick when it comes to his disagreements or issues with Tucker. But we're going to get into Iran first very quickly. All right, and that's why there's not really much to add to the conversation with Iran. I believe Trump is going to do some type of address tonight. So maybe he'll discuss what the plans are for that. But we all know what's going on with Iran. We all know that the administration is doing Israel's bidding. We know that Iran would not be an enemy of ours, or maybe even on our radar to the extent that it is today, if we obviously didn't have the relationship that we have with Israel, and if Israel wasn't trying to do all the things that they're trying to do in that region. It's not likely that Iran is going to just accept giving up their ballistic missiles they've already acknowledged that they're willing to work when it comes to their nuclear capabilities, but to think that they're going to get rid of their missiles, it's like, yo, you're asking me to tie my arms behind my back while you allow this other country who has clear intent of punching me in the face, but you want me to just trust the process as far as me putting my hands behind my back and thinking that that's going to be the best way to bring peace in that region, when Israel has made it clear in other cases, whether it's the clean break strategy. I mean, you heard Mike Huckabee in the interview say that Israel's entitled to all of that. So understanding that, hearing Mike Huckabee say that, and then our overall understanding of this greater Israel project, we know what's going on. We know what's going on. So do we really need to spend that much more time talking about Iran? I agree with Nick, everything that he said as far as, we can't handle, we're pulling out of Minneapolis with ICE. We can't handle getting our own regime in align with the other politicians that run our cities and states. But now we're going to go over there and somehow bring some peace or some sanity to the regime of Iran, which seems like in a lot of ways we contribute to the chaos, but that seems to be a reoccurring theme anyway. What do? We cause disruption, cause chaos. Then we can act as if, well, we need to save this same group that we've been causing all this chaos with, we need to save them. So it's the same play. It's the same play. And if people don't buy into that, then okay, a 9/11 will happen, and then that'll get people on board. That'll wake people up. So we see what's going on, but I don't want to spend too much time when it comes to the Iran thing, because I would just be repeating the same thing that I said on 2 or 3 shows yesterday, just making it sound differently. So let's get into the conversation that I disagree with Nick when it comes to his understanding of Tucker Carlson and how he conducted the interview with Mike Huckabee. He said he agreed with mostly everything. And I agree with Nick when he says Mike Huckabee's job is to highlight Israel to us. It's to make an appeal almost to us why Israel should be so important to us. Now, Tucker pressed Huckabee on, is Bibi Netanyahu's family from here? Seems like they're Ashkenazi, so therefore they're from Europe. And where Nick says that Tucker is lying or being disingenuous, and he said lying at some point, as far as him asking these questions and that it's dangerous. Bro, people are asking these questions. I don't know what information Nick has to where he just thinks that it's the DNA test proved without a shadow of a doubt that these people are from there, but that's simply not the case. It's not the case. And perhaps Nick just needs to look into it a little bit more. I did a little bit of digging, not only today, but I've been, digging when it comes to this. And what they try to say is that because, and it's mostly on the father's side, the paternal line, that because Jewish men, the Ashkenazi men, have a marker, which is pretty much a series of thousands of different characters, but let's say one sentence, or out of those, whatever it may be, one marker is similar to the people that are there right now. Now, that could mean a bunch of different things, and we're going to go through this. We're going to go through this because I got some information from online that you guys can, I'm not using ChatGPT right now, using the Google AI, and actually using Claude too, but for this, just use Google AI. So just to let y'all know exactly where the reference is. But I think that Nick's problem is what I actually called out when I did a review of Tucker Carlson's interview with Mike Huckabee. Nick doesn't want this attached to Europeans. See, Nick is standing up for Europeans when he says, no, don't blame this on white people. The Israelis are not white people. He's trying to push a different narrative, and he's trying to shape his facts based on the narrative that he wants to validate, rather than actually looking at it, in my opinion, from a broader scope. He's just locking in on, they had a marker, so therefore that shows their DNA. There's plenty of people that have markers that share similarities. And you can have a marker and your family never even be from that area, because obviously you look at all of Europe, you know, and a lot of these regions where people go all over the place, your past ancestors could have just, let's say, bred with, you know, one person. You could have somebody in your DNA line that had somebody who had somebody else that was related to the region, and that would show a similar marker in a lot of years. But I don't want to get too specific until I start actually reading the notes. So we'll get into that. But overall, I think this is just another reason why it's so hard for people to call out what Israel's doing, and why it's so hard, let me be very specific, for Christian Americans to call out what Israel's doing. Because to call out what Israel's doing, you have to, it's the pot calling the kettle black. It's the colonizing, imperialism, everything that Israel's doing is exactly what America was created with, or created by. Implementing those same strategies, going about those same techniques. And also, not only, well, let me not get into that at this point, but also when you factor in the Bible, like, can we take a step back and just say that I don't think that any group of people should get some sort of deed or right to land because like something in your scripture says that. Like, are we able to have like that adult conversation? Like, it doesn't even matter. It shouldn't even matter whether you're from the place or not. Let's say that Jewish people are from the area. So what? So what, you're from there? Should Native Americans and American Indians be able to go to Donald Trump and say, yeah, this shows that I'm from here, so we'll just take Jersey. Don't trip. Matter of fact, we want somewhere hot, so we'll take this part of Florida. We don't need the whole state, but we're just going to take this part of Florida. No, you were conquered. You lost the war. That's what gives you the ability to be there. That's what it is. This is not God, or is not showing that your people were there at some point in time, so that gives you the right to the land. I think that we need to have more adult conversations when it comes to this, and just say, like, yo, first off, not everybody like believes in the same religion. Not everybody, I guess, believes in the same God, depending on how people choose to look at it. Even though I believe there's only one God, but based on the messages that certain gods give, I'm not sure if that's the case. But let me try to just stay focused when it comes to this. It doesn't matter what your scripture says. That doesn't give you the right to take somebody else's land. And now what we're getting ready to see is when Mike Huckabee's in that interview saying that, well, actually, Israel's entitled to a lot more of the land. We're going to see how all this plays out. This is the results. This is chickens coming home to roost when it comes to European colonization, when it comes to colonizing in general. Because it's not just Europeans, but to be fair, Europeans had the European colonization. That's what we're currently living in the result of. You know, when it comes to me living in America, whether it comes to Canada, whether it comes to all of these Spanish-speaking countries, all of these English-speaking countries, when it comes to Haiti, when it comes to what France is doing with Africa, African nations, and has been doing for a very long time, extorting them of their resources to the point where African countries have to give the French their resources and then buy it back from them. So we're living in those days and times where European colonization has shaped our current society. But I want to get into some of these notes specifically related to what Nick was criticizing Tucker Carlson for, because I just don't understand it. I just don't understand it, how Nick can present this as if it's just fact when DNA evidence is not clear cut at all. And the fact that they only have a certain amount of markers when it comes to DNA evidence makes it that much less clear. So let's get into it. So this was a response that I got from Google AI, just asking some questions about the origins, and this is what they said. In the world of genetics, a marker is often just a single point of variation in your DNA, like a specific typo in a 3 billion letter book. Let me say that again. In the world of genetics, a marker is often just a single point of variation in your DNA, like a specific typo in a 3 billion letter book. Having a Levantine marker doesn't mean you are from there. Once again, having a Levantine marker doesn't mean you are from there. It means you share a specific genetic mutation with people who currently live there or with ancient remains found there. Here is why it's often a statistical illusion. Sharing is an origin. You share 98% of your DNA with a chimpanzee, but you aren't from the jungle. Similarly, sharing a marker with a Canaanite skeleton from 3,000 years ago doesn't negate the fact that your last 50 ancestors were born in Poland or Germany. National Geographic notes that these markers only show a statistical probability of a connection, not a direct family tree. So why is Nick presenting this as if what he believes in is fact? It's simply not. Now, he can give certain evidence to why he believes what he's saying is true, which I don't believe that he did specifically here. But also going back to it, Tucker asked Mike Huckabee, why doesn't Bibi Netanyahu and people take a DNA test? Mike Huckabee didn't even respond saying what Nick says because Mike Huckabee, I believe, I have to just assume this, that he knows that it's not true and that it can't be proven. And that if you actually do start doing a lot of these DNA tests, what is that going to prove? All it's going to prove is that the Palestinians have a closer ties to the land than the Israelis. And once again, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter because it doesn't matter what God promised, what your perception of your God or whoever you believe in promised a certain group of people. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And to even think that God would do something like, it's like, I don't even want to get into the whole back and forth and piss people off and have people in the comments talking about all this, Jesus is king, Christ is king and all that. I love Jesus. Jesus is an amazing man. I think so highly of Jesus that it's very hard for me to believe that Jesus would be okay with a lot of the things that people do in his name. That's my understanding of it. That's how high I hold him in such regards, as far as having a standard for just being a decent person, an exceptional person, I should say. Having exceptional morals, having that godlike standard across the board in all these areas, to the point where it's very hard for me to look at what people do in Jesus' name and think that, oh yeah, Jesus would be okay with that. So let's keep going. The one ancestor effect. Because DNA is passed down in chunks, you can carry a Middle Eastern marker from one single person 1,500 years ago, even if the other 5,000 ancestors in your lineage during that time were all European. Let me say that again. Because DNA is passed down in chunks, you can carry a Middle Eastern marker from one single person 1,500 years ago, even if the other 5,000 ancestors in your lineage during that time were all European. Companies like 23andMe highlight these markers to give people a story, even if the actual genetic contribution to their physical body is microscopic. Shall I continue? Reference populations. As the MIT Technology Review points out, DNA companies compare your spit to a reference panel of people who live in a region today. So you're comparing the spit to a reference panel of the people living in the region today. Just want to be clear. If the reference group is also mixed, the marker becomes even more vague. If it's not an exact science, it's a comparison game. So they're comparing the spit from, like, let's say we do a DNA test of Netanyahu, you're comparing it to the people in Palestine right now. Now, with all the mixing that is going on and throughout the thousands of years, it's likely, especially if all you have to have is a one person 1,500 years ago with 1 out of 5,000 ancestors showing some sort of linkage, obviously there's a high likelihood that there may be a shared marker. If I'm understanding it correctly, maybe I'm not. So I'm gonna go to another section because then I asked a follow-up question. I said about what if my people didn't come from those regions? Can I still have a marker? And then they said, exactly. You hit on the secret of population genetics. Markers aren't exclusive. Just because a marker is labeled Levantine doesn't mean it only exists in the Levant. Here is how you could have one even if your people never step foot in that region. Let me say this again. Just because a marker is labeled Levantine doesn't mean it only exists in the Levant. Here is how you could have one even if your people never step foot in that region. Convergent evolution. Sometimes the exact same typo in the DNA happens independently in two different parts of the world. A scientist might see that marker in your DNA and assume it came from the Middle East because that's where they've seen it before, but it actually just popped up randomly in your own lineage. Shared ancient ancestors. Before humans settled into specific regions, we were all moving around. You might carry a marker from a group of humans 15,000 years ago who eventually split, some going to the Levant and some going to where your ancestors are from. The marker is the same, but the history is totally different. Last point, the broad marker problem. Many markers aren't specific to a country. They are broadly Mediterranean or broadly West Asian. If a DNA company wants to make their results look precise and cool, they might take a broad marker you have and assign it to a specific spot like Israel or Palestine just to give you a more interesting map. It's the finesse game. So let me just finish this up. This is why the Council for Responsible Genetics and other watchdogs warn these tests are often genetic astrology. They take a tiny vague piece of data, the marker, and wrap a huge specific story, the region around it. It's essentially a guess based on where that marker is most common today, not a GPS track of where your ancestors actually lived. So if you're from a completely different part of the world and a test says you have a Levantine marker, it's more likely a statistical quirk than a secret heritage. Does it surprise you that these multi-billion-dollar DNA companies are basically using best guesses to tell who they are? But Nick is presenting it to y'all as if it's a fact. That's just wrong. It's not a fact. It is not a fact. A marker does not mean that you are from that area. A marker does not even mean that you have ancestors that ever stepped foot in that area. It's just not true. But my overall point is it doesn't even matter. It does matter just because that's the claim that people are making. So we can call out the BS claim. If it is BS, let's do the research. Let's find out. That's what Tucker was suggesting. Now, even if you do the DNA test, you can only find out to a certain extent. And when you start to actually dive into it, maybe they would see that their markers are pretty irrelevant when it comes to claims of ancestors being from that land. Otherwise, wouldn't they double down? Like, these are people that are going out of their way to try to prove that they are from this region, that are always trying to prove, does Israel have the right to exist? Is this the homeland? Is it? Okay, if the DNA tests were so in your favor, why would Mike Huckabee not be aware of that? Why would Israeli officials not be putting that type of information out there? Instead, in Israel, it's not that DNA tests are banned, but there's government oversight. It's not like here where you could just order a DNA test. There's government oversight with all of it. I wonder why. Just questions. So when it comes to Tucker's interview with Mike Huckabee, I'm mad that, in my opinion, Nick allowed his bias towards Tucker and his bias towards perhaps just being a white European person to get in the way of just acknowledging this as just an amazing interview. Like, there was a but. In my opinion, there shouldn't be a but. And in my opinion, it distracts us from what's actually happening. Now, Nick may not be concerned with whether or not these people are actually from there. He's presenting it to us as a fact. But if you're saying that that's where Tucker went wrong, and if you're saying that that's so dangerous, then I would think that you also have to do your due diligence in making sure that the things that you're presenting as facts are actually facts. That's the problem that I have with it. Because it's not a fact. Unless Nick has certain information that I'm not privy to, or that the majority of us have not been made aware of when it comes to understanding how these markers work and these DNA tests work, then present the information. And hey, you present the information, I'll take a look at it, and then I'll formulate a new opinion on it. That's what we should be doing. But you didn't present any information. You're just standing on it saying, everybody knows, it's a fact that. No, it's not a fact. It's not a fact. And matter of fact, based on the actual facts that I looked up, it's not likely. It's not likely that you can prove it. It's not likely that you can prove that Ashkenazi Jews are from that region. But it's just another example of how people's biases can create blind spots or set the tone on how they're going to perceive something. And Nick clearly perceives what has been presented to him as a fact that simply isn't. Now, you guys let me know. You guys do your own research. Now, are you just going to believe whatever Nick says? Or are you going to actually do your due diligence? Because I'm not telling you to just believe what I said. I'm telling you to look it up. The only reason why I looked it up is because I remember months ago, years ago, like this has always been a thing where it's like, what makes these people from this land? I just looked at it. At first, the reason was like, oh, they don't look like they from that region. Oh, I see the imagery, how the imagery game has been in play. A lot of people don't want to admit, but the perception that even if we have of Jesus, the picture that is in all of our minds when it comes to Jesus, we understand that imagery plays a huge role in our faith and how we look at certain things. So it's my understanding, maybe this is completely wrong, that that image of Jesus was painted by Michelangelo. Let me actually, did Michelangelo paint the picture of Jesus? This is just my understanding. I may be completely wrong, but I always looked at, okay, so Michelangelo painted several famous depictions of Jesus through his most iconic image, though his most iconic image of Christ is found in the Sistine Chapel. There is a common modern misconception that Michelangelo created the standard look of Jesus, the bearded, long-haired man, based on a personal lover. In reality, that specific European-looking portrayal had been established in art for nearly 1,000 years before he was born. So this is saying that when it comes to Jesus, that Michelangelo didn't originate this particular painting. I'm cool with diving into that. Like I said, I have no problem being wrong or right on any of this, but I don't believe that any of us looking at the painting of Jesus believes that that's an accurate description of what Jesus looked like. Now, if it was, then cool. And this is the whole conversation, even when it comes to Israel. What's so funny about this is that when I have brought up this in certain conversations, saying that, oh, the people that are there now, they don't look like anybody that's from the region. What is ChatGPT, people in person when I have these conversations, or Google AI, or all these other AI platforms? What do they say? They say, oh, well, over time, they developed European characteristics because they were living in Europe. Okay, so if that's the case, then why does Jesus look European? Was Jesus also, were his people living in Europe for a very long time? No, okay. Now for a lot of y'all, I'm sure y'all don't care. He doesn't care because it makes sense to have whoever you're looking up to as your savior as looking similar to you. Most people's saviors look like them. Most people worship people that look like them. It does something to you. It makes you believe in it more. You see more of a connection between you and your Savior and God. Makes a lot of sense. Now, for others, let's say when you're bringing people over here on slaves and you're forcing Christianity on them, I'm going to be scratching my head like, I don't know about that one. But to each their own. To each their own. I'm just expressing from my point of view, like Nick is clearly expressing from his point of view. And I think that his point of view on Tucker having an issue with Tucker asking certain questions regarding the legitimacy of people like Netanyahu, who are from Poland, who are from European countries and spent long periods of time, their ancestors, long periods of time in Europe. Nick is just trying to make it seem as if, no, they're not European. They're Levantine. Well, that's not necessarily the case. And also, when you look into this, Jewish heritage is supposed to be passed down through the mother. So if you look at a lot of these DNA tests, it actually is stronger in the father. And I saw certain suggestions that they were making. I don't even know if they're legit, but they were saying that a lot of the fathers, when they went to Europe, they were converting and having kids with non-Jewish people, non-Jewish women. So if that's the case, and if the lineage comes from the mother, then doesn't that kind of bring about like some sort of like scratching the head kind of thing, where it's like, well, if the fathers only show it, then it's supposed to come down through the mother. But I'd have to process that a little bit more to even figure out, what that actually means. And the point of it is, a marker does not mean that you're from the region. It does not prove that you are from that region. We accept these DNA tests as, oh, I'm from this area. Oh, I got family in this. Oh, I didn't know that I was part Irish. Bro, it's just giving you a story in a lot of these areas. It's just giving you the story in a lot of these areas. Now, maybe they have more powerful ones that can detail it, or we can look into it a little bit more detailed than just a common DNA test, then let's do it, right? Israel has superior technology and capabilities. Why not lean into that? Why not lean into that? And even if it comes back that they are actually from the region, there is absolutely nothing wrong with Tucker pressing Mike Huckabee or anybody else on this particular issue. So just wanted to highlight that. So let's keep it moving. Let me see if I just want to make sure that I'm paying somewhat attention to the notes before I get out of here. But yeah, when it comes to Huckabee, I thought that Tucker interview was one of the most courageous pieces of journalism that I've seen in a very long time. One of the most courageous, and I don't even want to say it's just courageous because there was a lot of skill involved there. A lot of skill. And Tucker not only had to have a lot of skill, but he also had to be very aware of certain history in that region. So it was, he was well informed on the topic. He understood the skill of communication and what he wanted to get out of Mike Huckabee, what he wanted to put Mike Huckabee on the spot to answer, and also being courageous enough to press people on the fact that, oh yeah, you may not even be from that region. Now we heard Nick say like, oh, I've heard people saying this type of stuff as if it's like witchcraft or something, or I don't even want to say if it's witchcraft because I'm assuming, I guess, how I just said it, witchcraft isn't real. I didn't mean it. He said it like it's some type of monsters under the bed. Like, oh yeah, people are just saying, is this just a conspiracy theory? Is that the conspiracy theory, or the conspiracy theory the fact that Bibi Netanyahu's trying to act like his family's from that region? I guess that's for all of us to do the research and decide on our own, come to whatever conclusion our research shows. But once again, I do not think that from what Nick said on this show, it didn't sound like he was well versed and took as much of a deep dive into them having that connection to the land as he presented it. So let me see if I missed anything else on this one. Yeah. All right, so I think that's pretty much it for me. Like I said, these are the problems that come up when you're trying to convince people that they should accept the word or accept the scripture, and that be enough to give people land. It's like, well, this was written in the book that I believe in, that I'm supposed to inherit this land based on my descendants, so therefore I should be able to inherit it. I don't think that the world can work that way. I don't think that Jesus would want the world to work that way. Perhaps this is why a lot of this stuff is more so in the Old Testament than the New Testament, but I guess we'll just have to all do our homework, figure it out for ourselves. And before I get out of here, I want to make sure that y'all leave your responses in the comments. Leave your responses. What is your thinking on this? What was your thinking before you heard Nick discussing it? What was your thinking before maybe you even heard Tucker and Mike Huckabee having the conversation? And what are your thoughts now? Have you looked into it? Have you done your research? Don't just accept the things that Tucker is saying. Don't accept the things that I'm saying. Don't accept the things that Nick is saying. Do your own research, do your own due diligence, because when we start to accept things as fact that we're hearing from people without doing our own research, that's how we get misled. So we want to seek truth, right? Seek truth. That's what Jesus represents. So let's make sure that we're pursuing that path and that standard. So on that note, y'all, of course, I already told y'all, let me know where I may be wrong, where my bias may be coming into play, and we'll go from there. Like, subscribe, turn your notifications on. Shout out to our big bro, Robert, who always reminds us, turn them notifications on, make sure that we control the algorithm and the algorithm does not control us. And on that note, I'll see you on the next one. Ew.
TBGITC. It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a nigga on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there. Let's figure out a split that's honorable and fair. Tell me where you trying to take it. Bro, I'll meet you there. 1600 Penn, Wash, DC. Swear I saw the vision riding through the DMV. I envision prayers, but I could do VP. Hillbilly elegy, fuck, I look like JD. Shout out my cheat code, Dave and Karen raised me. And my big grower nuclear family.
And they don't like that. Strong fathers in the crib, BLM for that. LBJ society created all that. Victimhood mentality, I can't embrace that. And everything they taught in school, assume it's all cap. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Ain't no introduction, just some fun facts. In case you were wondering, I am Dak.
I know you heard me hit it 3 times for Dr. Umar. Shout out to Umar, man. We ain't kicking nobody when they down. And shout out to everybody that continues to show love, support, appreciating the message that I'm giving y'all along with the bro Nick's message. We gonna keep pushing, man. And shout out to the haters too, cause y'all in the comments heavy too. y'all the ones that gave me the inspiration to create this song. They kept saying like, who's the random black guy in the corner? I am.